Hi, how are you? Today I'm going to be sharing with you a little sampling of some records from my vinyl collection. I've mentioned before that I'm quite a fan of new wave and electronic music and a lot of music from sort of like the late 70s to the mid 80s. That's kind of the golden era for me. And a lot of my favorite albums, a lot of my favorite bands came from that time period. So today I'm just going to share with you a small sampling of some interesting records from my vinyl collection. Now before I do that, I want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel. I post new videos all the time, and the best way to stay on top of all the latest videos is to subscribe. It won't cost you anything, there's no obligation on your behalf, but certainly if you subscribe, it will definitely help my channel grow, and it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's take a look at a sampling of these records from my collection. Coming up first, from 1989, we have an album by the band Red Flag. And I always loved the band Red Flag. They were a duo, a brother duo. And this is their album Naive Art, which is certainly a lot of synth pop fans consider this a classic. There's certainly a lot of really good tunes on this one, songs that I've loved for many years. Especially Give Me Your Hand. That was always a favorite of mine. And there's another track called Russian Radio, which is also another old favorite. So definitely, if you're a fan of synth pop or any sort of electronic pop from the late 80s, you definitely need to get your hands on a copy of this one. Coming up next, we have, by the classic band Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, their second album, Organization. Now, I wouldn't say this is my favorite OMD album. I certainly like it. It's very good. Certainly tracks like Stand Low and The More I See You are old favorites of mine. And I like it a lot. It's a very good album, but certainly not my favorite OMD album. But still a good one. And next we have an album by Vangelis, the soundtrack king. Certainly he made a name for himself in the 1980s and beyond with various soundtracks. Of course, we all know the work he did on the film Blade Runner. Certainly anybody who's into synthesizers or electronic music is very familiar with that soundtrack. And there is a track on here that is from the Blade Runner soundtrack. Now, as you can see, this is called Themes, and this is a collection. It's kind of a sampling of songs from the early part of his career. There's various songs from various albums stretching back to the 70s and coming all the way up into the 80s. I believe this was released in the late 1980s, this album called Themes. Again, it's basically a compilation of Vangelis songs. And I actually bought this album at a little record shop in Quebec City a number of years ago, I think maybe about 11 years ago. And it's certainly an excellent overview of Vangelis. If you're looking to get into his stuff, this would certainly be an excellent primer to his work. And coming up now, here is a compilation called Hungry for the Hits. You gotta love the graphic of the wolf on the cover. And this is a 2-album collection. Now, I've mentioned before that I'm a big fan of the Ronco compilation albums that were released in the UK in the early 80s. I love those albums, and I'm always collecting them. This was not put out by Ronco, but it came out in that same era. It was actually released by K-Tel. Now, it wasn't released by K-Tel America. This is actually a release by K-Tel in the United Kingdom. And as you can see, it has 30 killer cuts. And it features songs by the likes of Joe Jackson, Nick Kershaw, Sade, Depeche Mode, the Gap Band, Shakin' Stevens, and so on. And it's a really fun collection. There are some songs on here that were huge hits in North America, but as is often the case with these UK compilation albums, there's tons of songs on there that were never played in North America. So it's really a cool and fun way to discover songs that you may have missed the first time around. And coming up now, this is an album by a Canadian band called Minutes from Downtown. I think their biggest hit was Heaven Street, which is on this album. Yeah, so it's a really good collection of sort of early 80s new wave. Not entirely electronic. There's a lot of guitar and bass and drums on this thing. But certainly new wave. Definitely new wave, as you can tell from the cover artwork. There is a song on this album called Wrapped in Velvet. And I remember that getting played a lot on the radio back in the day. And I always loved that song, Wrapped in Velvet. So if you've never checked out Minutes from Downtown, certainly do yourself a favor. This is an album that's very much sought after on the secondhand market. A very good collection of songs. And here we have the 1989 album Up by ABC. I'm a huge fan of the British band ABC. Their first album, The Lexicon of Love, is my all-time favorite. This album came out in sort of the latter part of their career. By this point, their popularity was really starting to wane. There were really no big hits off this album. They released singles like One Better World, which got quite a bit of play over in Europe, but not a lot of play here in North America, which is too bad because this is a really good album. This was basically ABC's attempt to do a house album. They were very influenced by the house music that they heard in the clubs that they used to go to at that time. So Up was sort of their attempt to do a house album. It's really good and really fun, and certainly different from the typical ABC hits that you may be familiar with, like Poison Arrow, Look of Love, When Smokey Sings, Be Near Me. It sounds quite different from those. So that's Up by ABC. And here we have a solo album by Colin James Hay. And in case you recognize that name and in case you recognize that face on the album cover, Colin Hay was the lead singer for Men at Work. And I've been a big Men at Work fan since the 80s, and I was quite happy to find this solo album by Colin James Hay called Looking for Jack. And it's a really good collection of pop tunes. The guy had such a memorable voice, a really huge talent. Definitely a great singer, a great musician, and a great songwriter. And the last album I'm going to share with you today is Violator by Depeche Mode. And this is still one of my all-time favorites. I just absolutely love this album. I had it on CD for many years. I wanted to get it on vinyl, and as luck would have it, just a few months ago, I managed to track it down on vinyl. Just an absolute masterpiece. Of course, this was first released in 1990, and just probably, in my opinion, one of the strongest albums that Depeche Mode ever did. And also, in my opinion, probably the best album of the 1990s. Just great from beginning to end. That's Violator by Depeche Mode. So that's my look at some records from my vinyl collection. Maybe you have some of these. Maybe you're a fan of some of the bands that I mentioned in this video. Certainly feel free to leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, and as I mentioned before, please subscribe to the channel. Hope to see you again next time. We'll see you. Take care. Bye-bye.